Okay, guys, so let's take a step back and review what we've covered so far. So, at first, we did some basic learning, some first steps, where we saw an intro video where we talked about all we were going to be doing is moving current from a battery through an LED. In the next video, which was called First Steps, we actually used or introduced the microcontroller and saw how we can move current from the microcontroller through the LED through its 5-volt pin and the ground pin. In the next video, we looked at the Arduino IDE and learned a few basic commands like digital write and serial print, and we connected that with the MCU. We basically saw how we could write code to digital write to a certain pin so that only when we called digital write, that pin would receive 5 volts. And when we set that pin to low, then it would receive 0 volts. Okay, and then we looked in the next video at actual sketches and a complete sketch where we learned a little bit more about coding, and we learned to understand Pinout. So we looked at the DHT11 specifically, which is one of the components you can connect to a microcontroller, and we learned about its pinout and how to understand how to make connections for any kind of component based on the pinout that we researched on the spec sheets. And finally, we looked at some components. There's some of the more common components that you'll be able to find or run into in the Arduino world, and we ran through a list of some of those components and what they're used for. And there's another related video, which was the one about project ideas. So I highlighted this or made it bold so that we could keep in mind that the whole idea of this log, of this channel, is to produce ideas for projects that you can actually complete and turn into viable products. So after we did some basic learning, we moved over to some of the advanced topics or projects over on the left side, where we looked at power sources, because it is one of the more common issues or pitfalls that you will run into when you're building your projects, is power source. We start by connecting everything to the computer USB, but eventually we need to move into different and more powerful power sources. And just to keep things interesting, we did a complete project, which was the 4-wheel drive car kit project. So I'll bold that as well. And then towards the end, we've looked at the general automation model, where we've looked at 2 videos. One of them was the sensing and visualizing data, and the second one was the actuating, or actually taking action in the physical world based on the sensed data. And we will finish that series with the full irrigation project. So we're going to look at a complete project and see how it applies to the general automation model. Okay, in some future videos we're going to look at a little bit more software packages. Another complete project is coming up soon, which is the NRF radio Wi-Fi project, CNC project. We'll look at some home automation. We'll build a robot, an actual motion-controlled robot. And we'll look at some basic Electronics 101 tips. So I wanted to kind of put things into perspective and see where we're going, because upcoming is basically a whole bunch of projects. I want to take you guys through my ideas and my projects and how I turn them into, like I said, viable products that we could market and sell. So that's where we're going. The blue upcoming area is what we want to focus on. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick graphic review of the 3 sections. So like I said, in the first intro video we talked about current. This is where we had that watch battery, the CR2032, very common watch battery. And we touched the pins of the LED and basically exemplified the fact that we're only moving current from one side of the battery to the other through a component, and we're basically making that component do its thing. Okay, some components, their thing is sensing data, others is actually actuating. In the first step videos, we looked at the MCU, we introduced it, and how we could get power from its 5 volts and its kind of completing the circuit with its ground pin. We did look at the LED, but we've basically replaced the CR2032 battery with power from the MCU, because we can tell the MCU when and where to send power. We can't tell a battery when to do it. In the third video, like I mentioned, the IDE, we learned about the setup and the loop functions, which are the main or the heart of any sketch or program that we're going to use to control our MCU. And we specifically learned that the setup only runs once at the beginning, and that the loop runs consistently or repeatedly, infinitely, unless something happens and it gets stuck. And we learned about digital write for sending high or low to pins, and serial print for debugging. In the next video, we looked at Pinout. So we know how to program the MCU to tell its pins when to receive power. And now we looked at the pinout of different components and how to learn about different components that we might use, whether they be sensors on the sensing side or actuators on the acting side. And that pinout would give us an idea of how to make the connection between those components and our MCU that we can program. And then we took a break and we just kind of looked at various components. If you recall, we looked at this catalog of a whole host of different components, both on the sensing side and on the actuating side. We looked at temperature sensors, vibration sensors, sound sensors. We looked at screens. We looked at relays and motors, and a whole host of passive and active components that we can use in electronics as well. Okay, and then we moved over to the power video because it's an important topic, the whole issue about power and how some things are fine, like a 9-volt battery for LEDs and maybe even a small DC motor, but eventually, even though it might be 9-volt or 12-volt battery, the amount of energy stored inside of it is too small, and you just can't deliver it that quickly. So then we talked about battery packs and how those are more powerful than a 9-volt. Okay, and we quickly looked at this four-wheel drive car kit, and we built it from chassis through to the motors and the Uno and the L293 shield, which helped us drive the motors individually. And of course, in the end, we looked at the actual code that we had to write to send power to the individual motors, depending on how we wanted it to move. In the various projects, we took an overview of some of the more common projects that we've done and that you may find on the internet. And one of the more interesting ones was the remote ignition for the Estes rocket, which we actually didn't use it to actually light the rocket, but we will in all of the upcoming videos that we're going to talk about. Like we mentioned, we're going to actually build these projects and try to make a viable product out of them. And in the general automation series, we saw on the detect side how to visualize certain data. In this case, it was from a humidity and a temperature sensor that we posted to an EMON CMS software system. And in this case, we saw a little bit more advanced data that we got from a gyroscope and accelerometer, and we actually put that data on a 3D model that we could see on screen. Finally, we learned about actuating in the second side of the actuating model, or the automation model, and here we were controlling the servo that is on the right side from the mobile phone, which is on the left side, because the mobile phone would send Bluetooth commands to the MCU, which would receive them through the Bluetooth unit and then act on the servo motor itself. Okay, so that's what we've looked at so far. Here again is a review of what we have looked at the intro to learning, a little bit of advanced topics in learning, and the general automation model that we're going to be applying to all these upcoming projects down here on the bottom left. And this is what we're going to be focusing on in our channel from now on. We're going to look at projects, come up with ideas, and take them basically from start to finish, and look at all of the different pitfalls that we run into, whether they be power issues or sensing issues, and there's a lot of those, until we can actually make a viable product that you guys could market and sell and actually make a living off of. Alright, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And definitely click on that notification bell, guys, because you want to be alerted to all the upcoming videos, because we're going to run into some really cool projects. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.